get overwhelmed at work? So much so that you've lost your confidence in your ability to be confident for dates, deadlines, and events? Well, while this isn't the only video to watch, I have a real story from a real client and a real situation who completely revolutionized their ability to handle themselves under high-stress situations. For those that are new here, my name's Matt. I'm a keynote speaker and educator just trying to teach people the whys and hows of their wonderful brains. Now, without further ado, welcome to my anonymous client success video. Let's talk about it. So I have a client. Let's call him John. And John is an accountant for a Fortune 500 company. He's one of quite a few accountants that manage other accountants and keeps everybody accountable? Please keep in mind that I'm trying to keep my confidential conversation with that client pretty confidential still, while still getting to share with you guys their great progress. It's a rather funny line to walk. Now, John is honestly somebody that handles themselves quite a bit better than most. Myself even a lot of the times, if I'm honest. John is incredibly strict on his routines. Make sure to drink 2 cups of coffee every single day, make sure that they go to the gym 6 days a week, and after a hard day's work, he actually makes sure that he has exactly 2 glasses of wine. Now, these are odd little details to point in, but I promise they're gonna get somewhere. John's told me a lot about himself in the past, and told me how much actually being an accountant is pretty good for him. He listens to classical music, he just crunches numbers all day, and he kinda just goes in there, puts in the time, and goes home. He is a heck of a lot more confident in just crunching numbers than I would be. So finally a session between him and I comes along, and he tells me about the most terrifying 2 days of his entire year. It's tax time. Now, taxes for a Fortune 500 company is essentially their NFL. That's the big leagues. It is definitely the day that you could screw up the most in your career. So I kind of get it why they're nervous. Now, John had exactly 1 week until tax season started, so we had to get to work. We start to talk about what actually John could do that is different from his normal day-to-day, considering his day-to-day still has to go on while we work on something. And one thing that John said to me that I thought was really good, he said that he was willing to change things up provided it didn't impact his overall job. So I started thinking about unique things that we could talk about. And this light bulb kind of clicked in my mind. Even though I didn't say all of this in the before part, John has a great diet, wakes up at the same time every single day, drinks those glasses of wine, drinks the coffee, listens to the same music every single day, and I realized dopamine is the answer. Now, you may be wondering, but Matt, food and alcohol and all of those things that you just said, they all give dopamine. Why in the world would he need more dopamine? When as a matter of fact, what I wanted to go to with John was actually to reset his dopamine tolerance. This, if none of y'all have heard about it before, is called the dopamine detox. Now, a dopamine detox, very simply put, is the ability to actually have less of the exact same stimulation that you normally get in a day. The reason why this is incredibly important is that when we essentially receive less dopamine on a daily basis, our brain is always trying to help us. The ways that our brain is always trying to help us is that it's essentially trying to always keep up with the dopamine that is currently being given on demand. So when you receive dopamine from content and then you drink some wine and then you go to work, you shouldn't do it in that order. And food and exercise and excitement and happiness and laughter and blah, blah, blah. Essentially, your tolerance towards your day-to-day is actually going to go up to the standard of exactly what we just described if that happens on a day-to-day. Now, what happens when our brain creates that standard is that it now takes that much to get to our normal. Now, what I mean by normal is essentially your baseline, your homeostasis. You're not too high, not too low. It's your normal is when you get in the normal things that you do on the daily basis that teaches your brain that that is your normal. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. Now, the interesting part about creating a baseline of dopamine is that this is affecting our concentration, our motivation, and our pleasure. When we get this generic amount of dopamine into our brains, this will essentially give our brains the optimal amount of concentration, motivation, and pleasure. The issue with this is that for high-pressure days that we tend to get into, we now need to live the normal ways that we spark our brains plus a little bit more. Remember when I talked about the wine, the exercise, the food, the happiness, the laughter? Well, now you need a couple of supplements. You might need additional exercise, which then requires additional rest. You might need something with a little bit more extremes. Coping mechanisms like not-so-great drugs, masturbation, and is it going to sound weird to say, but even pain. Now, for a lot of people, this leads us into an incredibly dangerous cycle of consistently wanting more and more and more. And when you don't take time to reset, all of a sudden our baseline, our homeostasis is so bloody high, it's really, really hard to feel concentrated, motivated, and happy on a daily basis. Enter in that lovely dopamine detox. This is where something that even a minimal of 6 hours has a notable effect on the brain. You can actually take that high stress bar that is much higher than it normally is and lower it significantly, just by essentially not doing stuff. Now, I do want to give a disclaimer. In the world that we live in, Dopamine is everywhere. And sometimes it makes it that being bored is incredibly hard. And actually, this is a part of the dopamine detox. Sometimes boredom is actually your body's way of detoxing everything that's happening to it. Which is why I want to caution you guys that we don't need to go as low as some studies may suggest. If you look into dopamine detoxing deep enough, I swear to God, you will see ancient monks talk about this, and they will talk about the idea of staring at a wall until you feel better. Now, I'm honestly going to say the studies do prove that that is the most optimal way to have a dopamine detox. But in the world we live in today, I really doubt that you're going to do that. So back to John. Talk to John to doing a dopamine detox. And the reason for this is so then that way he can reset his baseline so that it's so low that even the simplistic things that he has in his life increase his dopamine level so high that he feels abnormally concentrated, abnormally motivated, and abnormally happy. John was skeptical, but he did say yes. So enter in the plan that the two of us had together. We took a look at John's cell phone and we looked at the overall screen time that John was having. He was roughly having about 6 to 7 hours of screen time every single day. Now, I will say that John protested the idea of not using his cell phone because he does use his cell phone a bunch for work and to keep up with family. So what we said when it came to the cell phone is I want you to reduce this as much as you can. Don't have 6 hours, but you don't have to hit 0 either. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 all will have positive effects to your brain. John committed that instead of having 2 glasses of wine, he was actually going to have no glasses of wine and be sober until the day comes. We decided that the food that John was eating, while I have not disclosed it in here, it was still relatively healthy, and that one we weren't going to touch. And then because John lives a pretty good life outside of that, we essentially just tried to reduce the amount of TV being watched and the amount of friends that John was talking to for that week. Now, we kept in contact roughly for about the next 5 days. John was doing a wonderful job, reduced his screen time down between 2 to 4 hours every single day, primarily around the 2. Was staying completely sober, and even after a little bit of time, actually weaned off the coffee as well. And then all of a sudden, John started getting groggy. No longer getting his wine every single day, no longer having coffee and still having to go to work. He was even reducing his music to the point where it was really starting to affect him in a negative way. And John brought it up to me and said, I do trust you, but are you sure that this is going to work? And I told him at the end of the day, every single human being is different, but I believe, and the science shows, that this is something that's going to help you like crazy. Now, one thing that we understand about self-progression, motivation, all that kind of fun stuff, is that your belief means everything, which is why I think having a why and a how to everything that you're doing is incredibly important. That's why I'm very glad that John had me to talk to when he was having a tough time. For those of you guys that don't have support in your life, I do highly recommend checking out my Patreon. In there, not only do you have direct access to my DMs, but you also have access to every other person just trying to work on themselves and creating the best possible life that they have. Parents helping parents, students helping teachers, and hardworking professionals just giving each other the hacks that have worked for them over the time of working with me or working together. My goal over everything else is to become the most positive place on the internet, and I'd love to see you there. Finally, the dreaded 2 days comes for tax season, and John goes silent. Does not say a single freaking word to me. My heart is pumping. I'm like, I'm about to be fired. He hates me, never wants to work with me again. And then after 2 of those dreaded days of totally hating myself and deciding to become a cashier at a local grocery store, John gets in contact with me and says, can I tell you about my 2 days? I say, yeah. But I break it down in the professional way because truthfully, deep down, as much as I worried about it, I knew that John put in the effort and I believed that he was going to have a great thing to tell me. John starts off the conversation by saying 3 words that I was so unbelievably happy to hear. John said, I did it. And I went, woo! But then we started to break it down and I said, you gotta tell me what happened during those days because you went freaking silent and you had me worried sick and I trust myself, but I didn't trust myself, so tell me. So we broke it down and I said, you woke up in the morning. What did you do? John says, I put on a cup of coffee. And I said, how was your cup of coffee? And John said something I'll never forget. He said, Matt, it was the best cup of coffee I've ever had. And I went, damn, okay. So what'd you do next? And he says, I put my headphones in my ears. I listen to music. And he says they were the best tracks of music I've ever heard. And then I said, okay, so skip over that stuff. What's going on at work? You got to work during the hardest days of the year. What happened? And John said, well, to be honest, I did my work. As crazy as it may be, that's all he really had to say. We're not talking about he came in there and went, it's time for me to do my taxes. No, it's not about that. But this is kind of the neat part about a dopamine detox. What John went on to describe to me is that he did not feel overwhelmed. He did not feel uncomfortable. When people came and interrupted him, that was completely fine. His emotions were regulated and the work that he had to do, while still tons of work, was manageable. Once again, and I say this from the deepest part of my heart, when you do a dopamine detox, your concentration, your motivation, and your overall happiness, I do refer to to it as pleasure, but in general, we're talking about your overall happiness. Resets to such a low baseline that anything that you do essentially sparks your concentration, your motivation, and your pleasure that much more. Now, while this is different for absolutely everybody, John had an amazing experience. I thought it was incredible, and I wanted to share it with you all. Please let me know any experiences that you've had with dopamine detoxes in the comments below. I'd love to hear about them. Well, that's it for this video. Please give me the ultimate compliment by liking, commenting, and subscribing for more. My goal and mission is to truly impact the world in a positive way with my unique style of educating, and it all starts with you helping me show these social platforms that I am somebody worth listening to. Thank you so much for letting me teach you something new, and thank you even more for letting me be your ADHD guy. Don't forget to check out my other videos, they're gonna help you a ton. Now go drink water. A meow. Fudge. Fudge. Fudge sickle. Damn! Their ability to client from a story from a client. John getting I almost fell over. I really did almost run out of breath there. My goal and mission in all of this is, what is it? Wait, I just said that. Okay, scrap that. No, not that one. Was I just saying?